Hello, I'm Brenda Allison, a bookseller at Barnes & Noble, and today I am very excited to be in conversation with Ben Markovits. Ben is the author of a dozen books, and we are here to talk about his latest one, The Rest of Our Lives. The Rest of Our Lives was on the Booker Prize shortlist and is the January book club selection here at Barnes & Noble. This is a road trip story, a midlife story, and maybe even a love story. It's warm, human, surprisingly funny, and very touching. I am so looking forward to discussing it today. Ben, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're going to try and have a spoiler-free conversation today.
Okay.
So let's get underway. The Rest of Our Lives grabbed me from the very first page, the first line. Can you give us a synopsis of the novel?
Yeah, so it's a story about what happens to a marriage after the kids leave home. That's the quickest synopsis. The nitty-gritty is that it's told from the point of view of a guy whose wife had an affair when the kids were small, and they've hung on in the marriage, but he made a deal with himself at the time that when the youngest left home, he could rethink the marriage. He could walk out on it if that's what he wanted to do. I hesitate to put it that way because it's not like he signed a contract with himself or anything like that. It's just, in the early days when he was really struggling to come to terms with what had happened, this is what he told himself. And then the novel begins when he drops his daughter at university.
So can you tell us how did this novel kind of reveal itself to you? You talked about, what happens after the kids leave, but how did you come up with this idea? How did it kind of come to you?
I don't, you know, so I was sitting, I think, reading something one afternoon. I usually write in the mornings, not in the afternoons. And I was reading something, and then just more or less the opening page or the opening line came into my head. And I suppose I like sentences that both seem normal and odd.
Mm-hmm.
And that one seemed normal and odd. So I thought I should get up and write it down. And I wrote not just the first sentence, but more or less, I think I don't totally remember, but the first
Mm-hmm.
two pages. But I was working on something else at the time. And a few months later, or 6 months later, whatever it was, when I was done with that, I came back to it to see what I had done, to see what I had
Mm-hmm.
written. And there were a couple of things that interested me. One was this idea of a guy who feels like he's done nothing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if that might be part of the problem that he would have
Mm-hmm.
to deal with later on. And the last line of this opening that I had written said something like, if you have a C- marriage, it's hard to score much higher than a B overall in the rest of your life. And that seems kind of reasonable, but also crazy
Mm-hmm.
as a way of looking at your life. And I imagine somebody who spends too much time grading how things are going,
Ah,
and that might be a problem for him. I mean, it's natural, right? We spend the
right.
first 18 years of our life in school getting the scratch and sniff stickers, and he goes on, he becomes an academic. And so to think of your life in those terms seemed very natural, but also it seemed like a problem. And that's what I wanted to write about as I went on.
Oh, that's an interesting way to think about it. I had a note here about like I love the first line. He says, "When our son was 12 years old, my wife had an affair with a guy she knew from synagogue." So like, how did you weave that into the larger story? Because the affair is not the center of the story. It's kind of the beginning. It's only more of a jumping off point. So you can talk about how you like worked that into this larger story about Tom and
Yeah,
his life.
yeah, it's tricky, obviously, because you want the story to move forward.
Yeah.
But then, when something that's mattered a lot happened in the past, you have to deal with it and think about it. And part of what occurred to me is that as he drives off across America, I don't know if this happens to you, but I often carry on conversations with people I'm close to in my head long after those conversations have stopped in real
Oh
life.
yeah.
And quite often they go better in my head
Always. Almost
than
always.
than they do in real life. And I just thought that one of the things that might open up in this book is that as he drove away from his wife, actually, they can think about each other a little bit more clearly.
Hmm.
And and as lovingly as they actually feel toward each other, but it's not always easy to get that out when you're in the presence.
Hmm.
And one of the things he's going to think about is the affair and why she did it. And I think there's a moment in the book where he realizes just how intense a period of her life it must have been
Hmm.
to go through this, and that he almost feels bad that he wasn't there to help her through it.
Oh yeah. I remember that part.
And all of these, I think, I mean, the book is, I don't want to give anything away, but I think of it as a kind of a love story, even though it's about somebody running away from his wife. Part of what they're trying to do is come to terms with what they have made of their lives.
Right. Right. I want to talk a little bit about craft and how you structure this story. The novel takes place over this pivotal time that Tom, I hesitate to use the word decides to drive across the country. And I want to talk a little bit more about Tom's whole indecisiveness. But let's first talk about like it jumps to flashbacks of his life up to this point, his childhood, his college, playing basketball, raising children, his career choices. But did you always plan to write it this way with the flashbacks, or how did you think about the structure?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems of the road trip novel is that
Mhm.
your character ends up moving away from the source of the plot. And the source of the plot is the marriage, right? But then you have this
Right.
story in which he's moving away from the marriage. And so I wanted to think about things that would keep the story active.
Hmm.
Um, and there are a couple of things. I mean, I don't think it's giving anything away to say that while this is happening, and for months previous to dropping his daughter at university, he's been getting sicker
Hmm.
in ways that the doctor can't figure out. And so one of the
Right.
kind of ongoing plots of the novel is what's going wrong with him medically. Um, but I guess I kind of figured, what would you do if you're running away from your middle-aged life? You'd want to revisit
Hmm.
some of the scenes of the part of your life where you felt like maybe you were happier. And so along the way, as he's driving across America, he revisits people that connect him to different parts of his life. So he revisits his brother. Obviously, he grew up with him. He
Yep.
revisits a grad school buddy, a college buddy, an ex-girlfriend, and ultimately he sees his son, who's a little older than his daughter and living in LA.
Hmm.
And all of these give him an occasion to think about what's come before as well as what's happening now.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about those characters. Tom is the main character, the protagonist here, and he's alone really with his thoughts for much of the novel. But like you kind of said earlier, he's having both real and imagined conversations with Amy, his wife, with his children, with these people from his past. So I want to talk about Tom as a character. Like, how do you see him? How do you think a reader sees him, the world sees him, how he sees himself? I want to talk about Tom.
That's interesting. I think whenever I write a character, I see them sympathetically,
Yeah.
and sometimes probably more sympathetically than a reader,
Hmm.
um, because that's kind of the job when you sit down trying to feel your way through what they would be feeling from their own point of view.
Hmm.
I think the key to what he was going through, the key to my sympathy with him, he says as much later in the book, but it's kind of the premise of the whole thing that he realizes he's been living his life for the past however many years just trying to get through unscathed.
Yes, I actually wrote down that line. So, yes.
Yeah, just he just doesn't want to leave any messes behind that his kids are going to have to deal with, because part of the backstory is that his dad ran out when he was a teenager and
Right.
he had to deal with the mess that left behind. And that seemed a really powerful keynote for a character, because I think a lot of people feel that, not just men, but in middle age, like they've gotten to
Hmm.
the point where they're just trying to get through without screwing anything up. And that's a really depressing way of living,
And that's inevitably going to screw it up.
and it's inevitably going to screw it up.
Right.
Um,
Right. I actually wrote that down and I wanted to talk about this concept of like regret. So at one point, Tom tells his college girlfriend, I used to tell my kids, you don't have to do anything you'll regret. Most of the time, you know beforehand, so you don't have to do it. I have this feeling like I want to get through unscathed, but that's not possible, is it?
no, what do you think about the regret line? Because I would say that most of the time when you do something that you're going to regret, you kind of know you're going to regret it. There's a minority of cases where you don't know,
Right.
but most of the time you kind of know.
But see, I feel like there's also this idea of like often what you regret in life are the things you didn't do rather than these things you did. So there's like
Yeah.
that fine line. And sometimes my kids are now young teenagers. And sometimes we'll tell them things like, it'll be a good time or a good story,
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you said, like sometimes you do know, like, oh, this is a bad idea, but you're gonna do it anyway. And you think like, well, maybe it'll be a good story, or you're gonna learn, right? Like, I think it's tricky.
It is tricky. And actually, I think it's in his case, it's tricky on a couple of fronts. One is that part of the reason he can say that, I mean, you mentioned his indecision.
Oh
In a
yeah.
way, it's not just it's he's gotten to a point where he's willing to abstain from almost anything
Mm-hmm.
in his life. And that makes it easy to make decisions that you're not going to regret. But
Right.
you lose a little bit of the impulse that makes life worth living. And so that's part of what he's wrestling with. I think the other problem he's facing is that when his wife had the affair, she put them in a position in their marriage where she's the one who did something wrong
Mm-hmm.
and he's the one who didn't. And that's really hard to base a relationship on those positions.
Right.
And on some level, what he has to do something wrong if they're going to move past, not just to act out whatever he is resenting about his wife, but to give his wife something to forgive. And that's really tricky, right? Because
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
that's an uncomfortable thought for him because he didn't want to put himself in the wrong.
No, he
Um,
likes being right.
he likes being right, like most of us. Yeah.
Right, right. I feel like Tom really repeatedly throughout the book, both in the past and in the present, less so in the present because I feel like he starts to learn, like basically has like indecision as decision, like
Mhm.
he was gonna be he studied English literature and then he was like, well, this isn't really it. And he, like many people, ends up in law
Yeah.
school, right?
Yeah.
And then he becomes a law professor. He marries this girl who used to be dating his friend. So much of his life just kind of happened to him. Even this thing where his wife has an affair, he sees it as a thing that happened to him
Yeah.
rather than, how he reacts to it. And it does make for interesting reading as you watch him learn. I mean, how did you piece together when Tom is going to start making decisions for his life?
I think that's really interesting. I mean, I I wonder how you feel about this, but I feel like a lot of us probably feel that life happens to us.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that novels sometimes oversell
Mm-hmm.
is the idea that we're making all these decisive
Oh,
choices.
sure.
We end up marrying somebody who we were introduced to by a pal, and we think that we're exercising this incredible range of choices, but in fact, it's that person that we saw. I actually just got a wonderful email. I don't know if I should say this. I got a wonderful email from an old student of mine
Mm-hmm.
saying that on the last day of class, I made him do a writing exercise with another student
Mm-hmm.
he'd never spoken to before, and they're now getting married.
Oh, there you go.
Which is one of the nicest emails I've ever gotten.
Yeah, that's
It's so
lovely.
weird to think that, but
Right.
I think a lot of us make these important decisions on the basis of really kind of happenstancy sorts of things.
Sure.
Um, so that I think that's part of what's going on with him. The other thing, I wrote this about a character in an earlier novel once. Um, I said about him, he wanted to want more from the world,
Mm.
and I feel like that's a more general predicament than often gets reported. There's this
Yeah.
idea that we want things all the time. In fact, sometimes we just want to want things.
Oh, 100%.
And that was that you mentioned like he did English, he wanted to be a writer, but he didn't really want to be a writer.
Right.
Uh, yeah,
Right. Or, I think about, we think we're making these decisions, but like often it is like the defining moments of our lives are often things we did not choose,
yeah,
whether it is illness, divorce of our parents,
yeah,
someone has an affair, someone drinks too much, like it's so often the things that happen to us and what do we do with them, right?
yeah. I
Right.
think actually most of it. I mean, I'm certainly somebody for whom this is true. Think of our lives as a kind of a state, not as a
Say
series
more,
of
say
events.
more.
Well, I mean, like we think of our lives as something in which we're kind of stuck in
Mm,
who we are and where we are.
mhm,
They're consistent. It's like a climate. It's not weather. We think of our lives as a climate. Like there's stuff that happens to us, but the climate doesn't really change.
mhm.
Um, and then something happens to us that's an event, and that seems like an interruption of our life. Like our real life
Mm.
is the thing that doesn't change.
Oh, right.
Does that not feel true? I mean, especially when you have kids,
Yeah,
right? You're
sure.
trying to
Oh,
sell to your kids all the time the idea that this is permanent, right? Whatever,
right.
we, mom and dad are permanent, and it's not true, obviously. The kids are changing, but you're trying to sell to them a home that is stable.
And then there's also this idea of like what you thought your life would be versus what
Yeah.
it's turned out to be, which is, obviously a real issue in middle age, especially. This is a very like middle age novel. Um, and I want to talk about this idea. And Tom's not the only character. You don't get a ton of Amy's perspective, the wife's perspective, but you get a sense too. I mean, she has an affair. She is always feels like she's like looking for something. This idea of like what you thought your life would be versus what it has turned out to be and how much you control you even have over those things.
Yeah. I mean, and part right from the beginning, actually, in the opening paragraph, he he says about his wife that maybe part of the problem was that he made enough money that she didn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And so that she, for lots of reasons that he goes into in the story, she doesn't quite have the career that she might have thought. She was going to be a teacher, and then for complicated reasons, that doesn't work out.
Right.
Um, and that part of the affair on her part was driven by a sense that she wants to shape her life and not just drift through it. Um, yeah, it's about, I mean, the other thing that strikes me, I mean, this is a middle-aged novel by a middle-aged writer about mostly
Right.
middle-aged people. I think one of the things that I find hard about middle age is that, in spite of all the things I've been saying, people normally want some kind of life change ahead of them that's at least possible,
Yeah.
that's
Something to look
desirable,
forward to, something
that
you
they can, yeah,
want.
that they can work towards.
Hmm.
I mean, that's like when you're 20, you have no idea what your life is going to be, and you're working towards all these possible life changes. And then increasingly, as you get older, all the life changes are bad. It's like divorce,
Right.
you lose your job,
Illness,
illness,
right. Retirement, boredom.
right?
Yeah.
You want some kind of life
Loss.
change that is not bad, that
Mhm.
you can look forward to.
And I want to talk about that like passage of time. There's several points in the novel where there's like a clear kind of before and after, right?
Mhm.
Like Amy had an affair years ago and now Tom is thinking about what happened then and what he's doing now. There's the scene Tom goes by himself to drop his daughter at college because Amy is worried she'll be too emotional. And he says, I love this line. He says, I had a sense of undigested emotional material, which is really just a disconnect between the totally normal passage of time you happen to be in and the totally normal passage of time that is about to follow, after which everything will be permanently different. And,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you said your kids are still young teenagers, I
Oh,
think.
yeah, they're 12 and 13. Yeah.
So actually, this book came out before it happened, but I dropped my daughter at university a few months ago.
Mm-hmm. How was it?
Uh, you know, she's not gone very far away from us, so it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like she's been back a couple times. It's
Right.
England is such a small country; it
Oh,
doesn't have the
right.
weight that it does in America.
Right.
But one of the things that occurred to me is that you realize then that whatever you hoped to do with their childhoods, like their childhoods have come out of the
It's
kiln.
done.
It's done.
It's cooked.
That thing that you wanted them to have experienced, like I really wanted to spend a year in Texas, which is where I'm from. I live in London. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted my kids to have a year in Texas. Didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you suddenly realize when you drop them off, that's now set. That's their childhood is you finished making their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a weird thought.
Yeah, to think like this thing that was such a like huge part of your life is
Yeah.
over, right? And now what does your life look like when this thing that has defined, decades of your daily existence is
Yeah. What do you even do anymore? Like
right.
when I mean, even before obviously they leave home, one of the things I liked about being a writer is it meant that I could be home when they came home from school, but
Right.
it was great when they were small. because then I could take them to the park or whatever.
Yeah.
But
They
then
tell you about their day, but then they're teenagers and
they
get
don't
in.
actually, they've got clubs and they're doing stuff, and you keep
Right.
saying to them, please play with me.
Right.
I've gotten used to taking this time off. But they have anyway. Yeah, you get trained by your kids, right? To live a certain way. I mean, I talked about this before. Like you spend the first 18 years of your life inside a family,
Mhm.
usually, and then you have this period outside families. And then if you do get married and have kids, you spend the next whatever 2 decades, however many kids you have, inside a
Right.
family again. And it makes you think that being inside a family is who you are. It's what you
Is the
do,
norm, is
is
what
the
it
norm.
defines your existence in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, it totally defines it. But then it turns out to be passing again.
Mm.
I mean, it's not like my kids are still my daughter's still
Right.
my
But it's
daughter.
not the
Like
same when they don't,
it's not it's
it's
not
not the
exactly the
same.
same. No.
Yeah.
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 And that's
Tom,
sort of what the book is about. They have to find a new way of working out what their life is going to be now that the kids have left.
right. And, Tom even visits these people from his past that he thought would be important in his life. His brother, he hasn't seen in years since his father died, his college buddies, his college girlfriend. He thought these people would define his life, but for years they haven't, and he hasn't seen them in decades. How do our relationships define us?
I know, did that happen to you? So that totally happened to me just because I more or less left America once I graduated university.
Right,
Did that happen to you that suddenly all these people that I was, I loved and I was very close to, I'm still close to some of them, but they have not shaped my adult life in the way
right.
that I might have expected.
Right. I think it's also interesting, like living in the age of social media, right? Like these people that you were not your, like, even some of your friends that you were close with in college or in your 20s, like that you don't, maybe you get a Christmas card from them now, but like I know what they're up to in a way I wouldn't have if I lived in a different generation. But yeah, definitely there are people that I thought, would be my best friends forever. And, now they live 1,000 miles away and when I see them, it's enjoyable, but we're very different people now.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I mean, and I think he says at one point, America's a big country.
Right.
And people move far away from each other. I'm not on social media in any way. So all the stuff
Oh, you're
where
smarter than me, Ben.
no, I don't think so. I mean, all that keeping in touch through
Right.
social media where you find out what people are doing. I have no idea what anybody's doing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, sometimes that's for the best.
I don't know. But you imagine lives that you didn't lead that you might have
Oh,
with people that,
absolutely. Like, what would it have been like if I had stayed in my hometown? The rest of my
hmm.
family still lives there. I don't
What's your
anymore.
hometown?
I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
And I lived for years in Chicago, and now we live in Arkansas. And yeah, I think about what my life would be like if we stayed in Chicago with our friends there.
Yeah.
And, but this is, kind of talking about that regret question again. Is it a thing you do or a thing you don't? And do you regret it, or is it just a different life that you never led?
I mean, it's probably a bit of both, isn't it?
Right.
So the other thing that I think is great about childhood, and to some extent college too, is that you can become friends with the kind of people that you're never going to become friends with later because you don't share the professional interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it turns out you like them just as much. And in some
Right.
ways you're closer to them, but you just can't meet them. I mean, it's very hard to meet them later on
When you're an adult, because
when you're
that's
an
not
adult
who you're
because then
spending time with.
you know who you spend time with, and you tend to, even the old friends who share your professional interests are a little bit easier to keep in touch with, not because you were closer to them, but that's a kind of narrowing of your personality that's painful. Because
Mm,
I mean, when you were a kid, you weren't whatever you ended up becoming. You were just a kid, and that was a kind of all-purpose identity,
right.
which you then lose as you become a writer or a professor or a teacher or a doctor, whatever, a mechanic. All these things then shape who you are in a way that excludes all the things that you were.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because I've never thought of it that way. I think of it often more as a sense of like, you know, sometimes I will refer to like, people you were friends with like your freshman year in college because
Yeah.
and in the book, the daughter goes to college and Tom says to her, like, everyone's going to pretend they're having a grand time the first semester, and no one really is. Like,
Yeah.
everyone's kind of homesick, kind of lonely, trying to figure out who they want to be. And often in that, that kind of embryonic stage, you're like, well, these are the people who live on my hall, or these are people that also play this sport or music or whatever. And so, like,
Yeah.
you just are friends with them. And then as time goes on, you can find people who are more maybe your people. So sometimes I think of it that way, as like,
Yeah.
you know, these are people that we were in proximity to versus people that you chose. But it's interesting to think of it the opposite way, which, like many things in life, both of those things are true. Also,
Yeah.
these are people who just like you as a person. They don't care that you can talk about books or you went to law school or whatever that is. They just
Right.
like your person.
Right. Right. And that's a nice thing to have liked, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Am I,
Absolutely.
am I right in thinking that you did a lot of different careers?
Yes, you are
Yeah.
correct. You are correct. I was a lawyer before I was a book person.
And
So
then you stopped, or you are you
yeah.
still a lawyer?
No, I mean, technically, yes, but I don't
Yeah.
practice anymore. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've gone through all these revolutions of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to think about, like, who you would have been if you were that person, or, whatever.
My parents are law professors,
Oh, really? Like the main
and
character in the book? Yeah.
like the main character in the book. And I remember you used to be able to get a T-shirt. I don't know if they still make them, from the law school, which shows a student sweating at midnight over his desk, and the
Hmm.
caption reads, "I want my old mind back."
I've never seen that, but sometimes I thought that
Yeah.
definitely when I was in law school. That is
But
really
you
funny.
never really get your old mind back.
No,
No.
no. My husband to this day will be like, "This is not a deposition, Brenda." And I'll be like, "This is just the way my brain is now. Sorry."
Yes, yes.
I want to talk a little bit about bodies. You kind of hinted at earlier, health and just being a person in a body is a recurring uh element of the rest of our lives. And also a recurrent issue in middle age, where for so long didn't think about being a person in a body, or it was mostly fun.
Yeah.
And here Tom is having these very weird health symptoms. He's like, maybe it's long COVID. It's nothing. The doctors can't figure it out, but it keeps coming back. Can you talk a little bit about that exploration of like being a person in a body that's maybe not doing what it's supposed to?
Yeah. So I don't know how much, I don't want to spoil anything
Yep.
later part of the book. So basically, I gave Tom the symptoms that I had as I was
Oh,
writing the book.
really? Yeah.
Um, and I did it partly for the reason that I mentioned earlier, that I wanted some kind of ongoing plot in his life as he drove away from his marriage that would sustain the narrative. I mean, that sounds
Hmm.
like a really stupid reason to get ill, but that's kind of what I did. But I also thought it was a symptom of the general things that were happening to him in middle age that you
Yeah.
mentioned. Like, he's been suspended at work, his marriage isn't
Oh, yeah.
great, his kids are leaving home, and his body is failing him. And he feels in all these ways that he's being pushed away from his life. Like, you think you can stay still, but you can't. Everything is pushing
Nope.
you away. But then, because I myself kept getting sicker as the book went on, it changed the way I wanted to write it. It changed
Mm.
my original intentions for the book.
Hmm.
And the only thing I don't want to give anything away, but the only thing I will say about it is that I, in, my original plan had been to leave him feeling almost completely abandoned. But then
Hmm.
as I got sicker, I just didn't feel that anymore, because so many people were being nice to me.
Yeah.
And in a funny way, sickness pulls you back to the center.
Oh, yeah.
Um, anyway, so that being in a body was very much part of not just the character in the book, but the writing of the novel.
Hmm. Yeah, there's even a part, and again, I don't think this is giving too much away, but he says, like, you know, someone's treating him differently because he's sick, and like, this is what it feels like to be loved. And
Yeah.
my husband has gone through some strange illness things this year, and amount of people who are kind and supportive, and like you realize like how lucky you are to be surrounded by other humans who do kind of rise to the occasion, like you said, is really,
Yeah.
really amazing. And it makes you think like, oh, hey, I want to be this person for someone else when they go through it too. It is a real like actualization of love in action, which I think Tom is looking for but doesn't want to say in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I wish your husband well. Um, it's all of that, everything you said is right. And it's when things that matter happen to you,
Yep.
the feelings that matter rise to the surface. And a lot of times the problems, especially in families,
Mm-hmm.
is that the real feelings don't have a chance to rise to the surface. They're
In
deeply
everyday
there
life
in
because you're
everyday
busy
life.
and you're worried about the
Mhm.
like BS of, your list or
Right,
whatever, right? Yeah.
right. And so one of the consolations of things going wrong sometimes is
Yeah.
that you start feeling the things that matter.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Speaking of like bodies and middle age, there's also this recurring pattern of like sleep and being up in the middle of the night.
mm,
Several times in the book, Tom is awake in the middle of the night and he can't sleep. Um, and he thinks like some of his I feel like he's really honest with himself sometimes in the middle of the night. And can you talk about how this plays out in the novel? This like middle of the night sleeplessness recurring theme.
yeah, I mean, maybe it's just I'm a middle-aged man. I think I have him quote the Paul Simon line. I don't expect to sleep through the night.
Right.
Um, I think there's a wonderful line. I'm trying to think in some Melville book. I don't know if it's Moby Dick, where he says something like the truest and soberest hour a man has is shortly before the dawn.
Oh, sounds about
Um,
right.
and you wake up at 4 and you're watching the light. I mean, I think there's a scene in the book where he wakes up early with his brother when they've gone to
Hmm.
their dad's funeral,
Yeah.
and because of the weird time
Oh
that
yeah. It's 4
the
a.m. in
West Coast time,
California, so you're awake.
right? And they watch the light grade into daylight, just feeling all the things that are there for them to feel, which because it's kind of the day, but also not the day, you have the space for.
Which
I
again
don't know. I
kind
mean,
of
it's
goes back to that idea of like when shit happens in life, like you can see what's important. Like when you're in that kind of like dark night of the soul, or when you're in that like the day is just starting, no matter how jaded you are, there's something there about like the beauty of life, the important things, right?
you hope so. I have a rule that I never try to think about when I take a flight.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't see this. I'm 6'6", so flying is not a comfortable thing for
Oh,
me.
my husband is
Uh,
6'5", so yes, I
okay.
get it.
And my rule is on a flight, never think about things that I'm writing
Oh.
because everything on a flight just seems awful.
Oh yeah, it's like this weird liminal time, like what
Right.
isn't even happening? How long have I been here?
There is no real anymore. Everything is
Yep.
denatured. The air is bottled. And
Right.
everything that you think, you can think about people that you normally love, and it just seems crumbly and thin. And that your books seem a total waste of time, and your work is unimportant, and everything is bad. So I try never to think about anything that matters when I'm on a flight. And you hope that the middle of the night thoughts are okay, but they don't have
Yep.
to be.
Right.
You can't, like the hotel room can smell of cigarette smoke, and the air conditioning can be on too high, and it's just a cold and artificial world that you're having these thoughts in. And
Oh.
anyway, so it's not always
No, you're
sober and
right.
true in a good way.
Yeah, you're right. Um, you hinted at you are a tall person and you played basketball. Basketball is almost like a character in the book.
Yeah.
Tom played basketball in college. He throughout his journey will stop and play a pickup game. Some of his buddies he played college basketball with. As I mentioned, I'm from North Carolina. I'm a basketball girl myself. My son plays basketball now. I want to talk about basketball as a character in the book, and you've written about
Please.
basketball before, so let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the ways I've changed in a lot of ways since I was a kid. I'm still
Hmm.
just childishly obsessed with basketball. I
Hmm.
wake up, I watch last night's games, the first thing. I'm seeing if I can make some kind of literary justification for just putting it in all my novels, apart from the fact that I really like it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to I'll see if I can come up with a few. I mean, so one is it's a cover story in the book because as he drives away from his wife, Tom sort of revives an old idea, grad school idea he had of writing a book about playing pickup basketball in America. Not because he really wants to, but he just needs something to say to people that
Like,
isn't,
what are
I
you
just want to do
doing,
it.
buddy?
Yeah,
Right.
right. But he does say at one point, I probably put it better in the book than I will now, that one of the things he liked about being on his college basketball team is that he realized how much better his teammates were than he was.
Mm,
But because he was a sort of, English student kind of guy, was quite good at articulating the ways that they were better than he was.
hmm
And that was sort of an interesting position to have as a starting point for being a writer. And that does seem so. When my first job coming out of university, I thought it might be fun to be a pro basketball player.
hmm
And I went to Germany because my mother's German and I had a passport, so I counted as a local.
hmm
And I got a job in the second division team, and I sucked. I was so
Stay
unhappy. So
honest.
yeah, I just wasn't good enough. And it turned
Yeah.
out I was like a super competitive kid, but suddenly I was in this world where they were all so good
Very good. Yeah.
at what they do, and they wanted it so much. And like in any normal circumstances, I would be the competitive jerk in the room. But in that room, I was like a mild mannered, it's
hmm
your turn, you do what you want kind of guy. Um, and that left a really deep impression on me.
mm,
Um, and as a writer, I think it's useful to remind yourself other people are better at their lives than you are. They know more about them. They understand themselves better than you can, even though it's part of your job as a writer to expose the ways that they've misunderstood themselves.
hmm
In reality, they would just be much better. They know their grandparents. They know how to put the key in the lock when they come home so that it doesn't
mm,
stick. They know all these things and that you don't. And so I try to fake it as much as I can, but I keep in mind the fact that they are better.
hmm
All my characters are better at the lives they're living than I am trying to imagine them.
Interesting. I think too, like, thinking about basketball in the book and then, other recurring thing in the book and Tom plays a part in this a little bit is this like trope of like the middle-aged white guy complaining about how the world has passed him by. And some of Tom's old friends feel this way, but Tom isn't even like sure how he feels about this, like good old indecision Tom. There's even a part where Tom talks about how Miri likes some like 80s music, but not the things he likes. She calls it like corny, depressing white guy music, which is very
Yeah.
funny. But I would love to talk about like, and I feel like there's also a connection about like, male loneliness and like, when you are on a team, I think in some ways it's an ability for men to talk about feelings and relationships in a way they don't get to in other places,
Mhm.
which is all a lot of me talking about things. But I would love to hear you talk about some of these ideas about male loneliness and the world passing you by.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the thematic links in the story is that as this middle-aged white guy drives off across the country and hangs out with other middle-aged white guys, they
Right.
complain about how
Right.
the culture has passed them by. It's hard for me to talk about this because like I don't like I'm sympathetic to everything, but it's
Sure.
not like I don't want the final note of this book to sound like a complaint.
Middle-aged white guy complaining, but that's not what it is at all.
That's
Yeah.
not, and in fact, by the end of the book, he kind of gets scared straight again
Oh yeah.
by talking to somebody who takes these ideas
It
so
was
far that he
absolutely
realizes
ridiculous.
I want nothing to do with this
Yep.
anymore. But it just seemed human that if you got these middle-aged old dudes together, that this would be the shape of their complaints. Um, his daughter says his daughter likes to call him angry white male,
hmm
but that's again, even that's kind of a joke because he actually never really loses his temper.
No.
And so if I put that anywhere at the forefront of the book, it would sound like it was a very different book than it is. Like part of his
hmm
problem is that he always keeps quite calm. And
Like
she's
sometimes I
teasing
wish
him.
he would get more worked up about things,
Yeah,
right?
right, right. But anyway, all of these feelings seem to me ones that I should explore in a novel about, with this subject. And I
hmm
wanted to do it in such a way that I could also undercut them.
Mm. And I liked how you said, like, you were, um, there's a little bit of a both and, like, yeah, this is how this guy feels or these people feel. And it's a lot more complicated than one story, right? And
Yeah.
it's very interesting, and there's a lot of sympathy and empathy for everyone, but also, like you said, there's a point where it's just like, oh, this is the ridiculous end game of this, and no, we're
Yeah.
not playing
And,
that game,
and
right?
it comes back to the things you were saying about being in a body, that one of the things that makes it easier to put up with him is that while he's having these thoughts, he's getting older and iller
Right.
and less threatening on any
Mm-hmm.
level that would make these thoughts scary, because he's just not capable anymore of the kind of resistance he might once have shown.
Right, right. I want to talk a little bit about, the book is very poignant, but also very funny. There are parts that I laughed out loud. My husband had to hear me read them to him. Can you talk about how you use humor in the novel, to kind of talk about this midlife?
Yeah, I wish. I mean, I'm glad you say that. It just seems like a lot of what we've been saying is kind of grim descriptions of
Right,
people's
like,
lives.
oh, bodies and divorce and middle age.
Right.
Ugh.
But in reality, people spend a lot of time having kind of a nice time. And partly they do that because they make each other laugh and they tell jokes about the things that are going wrong in their lives. Um, and I wanted to put that in. It's sometimes hard when you're writing sad things to remind yourself that this should be funny too, because
Hmm.
otherwise it's just not true. Um, anyway, so I do the best I can.
Yeah.
um, it just, yeah, there's always a danger with the more seriously you try to capture people's lives, that seriousness itself is a sort of distortion
Oh,
that
of course,
leaves,
right? That's not what real
right,
life is like.
right.
Even in the grimmest of times, someone's going to make a joke.
Yeah, and even when you're fighting with your wife or your kids, actually, I mean, I think families sometimes get a bad rap. They're really incredibly well-tuned machines for allowing people to get along with each other.
Mm.
And just try living with friends.
And learning those skills about, like,
Yeah,
how do you get along? How do
and
you,
learning those skills. Like, it's not that all families are happy all the time, but like if you
sure.
imagine living with strangers or friends in that close proximity, things will often go much worse
Oh,
than they do
yes.
with your family.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk too about, like, details. And again, this is like, there's one thing I love about the rest of our lives was your focus on detail. I always feel like specificity makes a story. Tom is driving Mary to school. And again, like, it could be any middle-aged dad or daughter. And then, he talks about, he says to her, well, who am I going to watch Friends with? And then he tells this very specific story about the pandemic, and it's this very specific nostalgia of this very weird time in all of our lives. And that was one of the parts that I read aloud to my husband. I'm like, oh, remember, like, you would start drinking at like 4, and then you'd watch a dumb sitcom and go for a walk. How do you incorporate those very specific details to tell this story?
I just feel that the page doesn't look right unless it's
Mm,
got a certain number of them in.
yeah.
Um, there's a show in England. I don't know if it's made it over to America. I think it's called Would I Lie to You?
Oh,
And it's a
heard of it.
panel. Have you heard of it? It's a
No.
really fun show. It's a kind of panel game show in which two teams of three people each have to tell stories to each other, and the
Mm.
other team has to guess whether these stories are true or not.
Oh,
It's really
okay.
hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard to know what does a true story sound like. And usually, a true story, like the things that make something seem true, at least to me, is that it doesn't all add up
Yep.
in a certain kind of way. Because if it doesn't add
Yeah.
up in another kind of way, it feels
You're
fake.
like, oh no, that can't possibly true. But sometimes, like, truth obviously often is like, wait, really? That really happened? Like, if someone
Right.
told you this, you'd be like, surely not. But that is often how life works.
So it should have some kind of weird
Yeah.
specificity to it. There's an Alice Munro story in which a kind of country cousin uh, keeps dreaming of visiting her city cousin,
Hmm.
and she was going to do it once, except they needed the money for a sump pump. And as soon as you say sump pump, you think, oh yeah, that's real, right?
You're like, oh yes, that is life. That is exactly what went wrong.
It would never have occurred to me to come up with that, and
Right.
that's what makes it seem real. So as I just want the thing on the page to feel odd and specific.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it worked on me. I will tell you that. Let's I want to talk about the title, The Rest of Our Lives. Can you talk about what it means? What's the rest of your life when large, meaningful chunks are in the past?
Yeah, I went through a lot of titles with this book. One of them I was thinking of was a line from a Tom Paxton song, "I can't help but wonder where I'm bound,"
Mm,
which I thought would be nice too. But it was a little, I didn't want to derive it from a song that hadn't
hmm
featured largely in the book. And I realized that the core of the book was what happens to a marriage after the kids leave home,
hmm
um, which is the rest of our lives. And then as soon as I came up with that phrase, I started looking through the book and realized it occurred a
mm,
number of times, but in slightly different contexts.
mm,
So it
hmm
both meant what happens to a marriage after the kids leave home, but also referred to the part of your life that is independent of the marriage and family.
Sure.
Um, and that seemed like a really nice tension
hmm
because
Like,
both are
who are
very
you by yourself? Who are you in
exactly.
relationship? Who are you when you're not defined by your roles?
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And so once I saw that tension, I thought this is probably the title to go with because it was the tension that seemed to me at the heart of the book.
Yeah. Um, is there anything else we haven't talked about that you want people to know about this novel?
I don't know. It's been really nice talking to you about it.
Yeah.
It's nice to, you've clearly thought sympathetically about it. And it's really nice to have this conversation with you about it.
I-
I think that's all. I think you covered a lot of ground. I think we covered a lot
Yeah.
of ground.
Yeah, I think so. So this is always my last question. We are a bookstore, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what you're currently reading and loving or one of your all-time favorites. Let's talk about other books.
Oh, nice. So I'm reviewing the new John Irving novel,
Oh, yeah.
Queen Esther,
Yeah.
which I'm about a quarter of the way through, um, and really enjoying. I'm
Yeah.
also reading uh, Phineas Redux by
Yeah.
Trollope. Are you a
Oh,
Trollope fan?
I am not. I've never read Trollope.
They're so addictive. And
Oh,
he does these big
okay.
series,
Yeah.
and he does the thing where a writer I know called these hangout novels, but he
hmm
goes so into such detail in people's lives that you're just kind of hanging out with them, and then stuff will happen in the plot. Anyway, so he has a series of novels about a young Irishman who wants to be an MP in
hmm
Victorian London, and the stuff that happens to him. Um, and once you get started on these books, they are really addictive. So I'm reading that at the same time. I'm doing the Irving book.
Oh, yeah. A little of
What are you
this, a
reading
little of
at
that.
the moment?
Oh, great question. I just finished reading Chloe Benjamin, who wrote The Immortalists.
Uh-huh.
It has a new book out in the fall of 26, and it's really, really great. It's kind of imagining a alternate, there's our universe, and then there's an alternate universe where time runs backwards. So it's like
Uh-huh.
kind of mind-boggling. She kind of creates this whole world. It's very interesting. And then I just read a book called Little One about a woman who escapes a cult as a child, and she's now like living her life, and no one knows who she is, and someone in the media finds her and is like, I think you were associated with this cult, and then it's like
Mm,
what happens after that.
that sounds great.
It was very great page turnery, but also like an interesting commentary on wellness culture, on the media. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed it. Well, this has been really lovely, Ben. Thank you for your time today. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.